Good morning. This is Northern Light for Thursday, September 7th. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe.
This summer's wildfire smoke and strong storms have dampened tourism in places like Lake George.
The forecasts are much more ominous. When a heavy thunderstorms are predicted, people tend to stay away. And so I think that definitely has had an effect on tourism.
Also, New York State released a long-awaited report earlier this week on recommendations for reducing road salt use in the Adirondacks. Plus, a fused glass artist gives us a tour through her Saranac Lake studio.
That piece is also going to take not just the cutting, it's going to take grinding those edges too a little bit, so I don't have all points that people are going to get jammed on when it comes out of the kiln.
For years, people have been telling true 5-minute stories live on stages all over the North Country at the Howell Story Slam. They're super popular with packed crowds. We've been recording those stories for our new podcast. Ethan Shanty wraps up the first season. All of that and more is coming up on Northern Light. Stick with us.
Broadcast of Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio is supported by Gray & Gray & Associates, CPAs, an accounting and financial services firm in northern New York with offices in Canton, Potsdam, and Spring Hill, Florida. GrayCPAS.com. And St. Lawrence Health, whose affiliation with Rochester Regional Health means more patient access to specialty care, stlawrencehealthsystem.org.
This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe. New York State released a long-awaited report earlier this week on recommendations for reducing road salt use in the Adirondacks. Kara Chapman has more.
The Randy Preston Road Salt Reduction Act was signed into law in 2020. It established a task force, pilot plan, and test program with the goal of decreasing road salt use in the Adirondacks. Road salt is a major pollutant in the region that contaminates lakes and residential water wells. The law said the task force would put out a report with its findings on road salt use and recommendations for how to use less of it in 2021. A 3-year pilot program for reducing road salt would start that year. But the task force itself wasn't even formed until 2021, and its report seemed to languish with state agencies. The Adirondack Explorer reported in May that members of the group were frustrated with the delays when they thought the document was largely completed. State agencies announced the release of the 27-page report on Tuesday, about 2 years after its original deadline. In it, the task force says an estimated 193,000 tons of road salt are applied to roads in the Adirondacks each year. The group outlines road salt's impacts on the environment, public health, property, and infrastructure. Recommendations for cutting back on road salt include setting reduction targets, snow and ice removal training, and providing public access to data about road salt usage. The task force additionally proposes several pilot programs. Among other things, those would look at managing cold spots where snow and ice build up on roadways, chloride-free zones, and seasonal speed warnings. The report says additional funding from federal, state, and local government sources will be necessary to implement the recommendations. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio.
The Watertown City School Board voted on Tuesday to join a class action lawsuit against major social media companies. According to WWNY-TV, the lawsuit against TikTok, Meta, and other companies says social media addiction has helped create a mental health crisis for students. Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Watertown Superintendent Larry Schmiegel told the station that he hopes the lawsuit brings awareness to social media's effects on students' mental health. WWNY reports that there's no cost to the district if the lawsuit fails.
Climate change is forcing everyone to reconsider what they do and how. That includes tourism destinations. Lake George already decided not to build an ice castle this coming winter after the last two were disrupted by warm weather. But it's not just winter activities. This summer's wildfire smoke and potent storms affected events and may have turned some tourists away. Tony Hall is co-owner and editor of Lake George Mirror newspaper. He says tourism numbers have been relatively flat this summer. He told David Summerstein that's a good thing, considering what he calls the 10 plagues of the tourism industry.
Rain, wildfire smoke, inflation, fears of recession, competition, and even climate change. The season has been relatively stable, which from the perspective of the hospitality business doesn't have the growth that they would like to see. But it's relatively flat, which is satisfying or sufficient for most, but perhaps not everything a hotel or restaurant owner would hope for.
Does that worry economic developers if they see, kind of flat? It's not going down, but it's also not going up. The fear that, Lake George is sort of losing, in the imagination of people who are looking to take summer trips?
I don't think that's the case, and we can discuss some of the plans that the tourism industry has to make certain that doesn't happen. But I have spoken to local government officials who do fear that essentially the economy may be losing some steam, and that they will have to start preparing their budgets somewhat differently, being more conservative in kinds of the projects that they can budget for. But I think they will be looking at autumn tourism, and depending on its strength, they'll know how they can start anticipating some future developments.
Let's talk about what you said before about the effect of the weather. I mean, what have things like, these crazy thunderstorms and especially the wildfire smoke, what effect has that had on tourism in Lake George?
You could certainly see it if you were out on the lake, that a lot of the islands were empty, where otherwise they would be filled with campers. So it was not especially pleasant, and it was somewhat disconcerting, but that certainly had an effect on whether or not people wanted to be outside. And then essentially with these heavy rains throughout June and much of July, we experienced them in a much more intense way than we have in the past. I mean, I can certainly remember as a kid in the 70s, there were rainy days and you were kept off the lake. But the intensity of these storms have affected events, have actually caused damage, have caused events to be canceled. And the forecasts are much more ominous. When heavy thunderstorms are predicted, people tend to stay away. And so I think that definitely has had an effect on tourism. I think people are well aware of the fact that climate change is having effects on the winter ski business, but I don't think much attention has been paid to the way in which it's affecting summer vacations and specifically special events upon which many communities now rely for their summer business. Somehow the tourism industry has got to come to terms with that, and in some ways it is. It's trying to create events that are more weather resilient, such as light shows rather than fireworks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how much local officials are keeping an eye on that.
I think they're surprisingly cognizant of it, and I don't mean to say that in a patronizing way, but I am impressed by the extent to which the climate change is part of their projections, not only in terms of infrastructure, but how it could affect the tourism economy.
Let's just wrap up on one other little note going on nearby in Glens Falls at the Hyde Collection. There is an exhibit that has a Bolton Landing, Lake George connection there.
It is indeed. It's to celebrate the 60th anniversary of its founding as a public institution. The Hyde has installed the first exhibit in history to treat David Smith, the well-known sculptor, and his relationship to music and dance. And that also has a local flavor because one of the people that he was influenced by and cooperated with was a modern dance choreographer named Francisca Boas, who happens to have been the daughter of the well-known anthropologist Franz Boas. And he sketched her students, and they created festivals together. She sent her students up to David Smith's studio to model for him. So there was a very interesting artistic community going on in Bolton Landing in the 1940s. And one of the interesting pieces here is a painting that he calls Piat, and it's of a cellist more or less embracing the entire world. And it's based on Gregor Piatigorsky, who was the famous cellist who lived in Elizabethtown in the 1940s. So it's a fascinating exhibition.
That was Tony Hall, co-owner and editor of the Lake George Mirror newspaper. He checks in regularly with David Summerstein.
You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. It's 10 minutes past 8. Good morning. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up, the first season of NCPR's storytelling podcast just wrapped up. And host of the show, Ethan Shanty, is back with us on Northern Light to take a look back. That conversation in just a few minutes here on Northern Light.
This is music by the Buskers out of the Thousand Islands, and there's more of their music as part of our Underscore project online. Visit ncpr.org/underscore. Northern Light is supported by AdirondackExplorer.com and AdirondackAlmanac.com, presenting daily updated news on public policy, environmental issues, and local communities in the Adirondack Park. And Cronin's Golf Resort, offering golfers the opportunity to experience fall foliage. Details at CroninsGolfResort.com.
Officials in Upper Saranac Lake say they've identified a suspected harmful algal bloom. Franklin County Public Health says the blue-green algae was found in Back Bay and the lake's most northern end in Santa Clara on Tuesday. The suspected bloom is small and localized. The State Department of Health says residents should avoid contact with water where there's a suspected bloom. Symptoms of exposure in humans include diarrhea, vomiting, allergic reactions, or breathing difficulties. Health officials say you should rinse yourself as soon as possible after exposure and seek medical attention if you develop symptoms.
The manual locks between Middle and Lower Saranac Lakes are going to be closed for construction starting September 18th. The upper locks will get $1.6 million worth of maintenance and repairs, including refurbishing the lock gates and doors, replacing the concrete walls and floor, and replacing the downstream boat dock and shelter. The Department of Environmental Conservation says a company from Middlesex, Vermont will do the work. The locks will be closed for use until sometime next year. Canoes and kayaks can still carry around the locks during the construction.
New York's statewide weather monitoring network is adding a new site in Lake Placid. Over the next few months, the Messinette will turn an existing weather station at Eline Farm into its 127th network site. Messinette Director Chris Thorncroft says it will provide real-time weather information for the region. The Lake Placid site will be Messinette's highest location in the Adirondacks and third highest in the state at 2,100 feet above sea level. A ribbon cutting will take place once the station is fully operational.
The St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Police Chief received national recognition last month. Matthew Rourke was honored as Police Chief of the Year at the National Native American Law Enforcement Association's conference on August 30th. Rourke joined the tribal police 25 years ago and was appointed chief in March of 2015. In a statement, he said he's humbled and honored to be recognized. Rourke said he's fortunate to work with police officers, a police commission, and a tribal council who, quote, are very supportive and forward-thinking in regard to the community's safety, unquote.
Fused glass is a different art form than stained or blown glass. Using a kiln, artists melt together layers of glass to create everything from colorful jewelry to decorative plates. Anna Williams-Bergen takes us into a glass fuser's workshop in today's North Country at Work story.
Marie Kogar's Saranac Lake workshop is a small basement room with bright lights. It's packed to the brim with glass sheets, glass chips, cutters, and molds. Everything you need to make fused glass artwork.
A coarse glass would be something that's very chunky, like this. Very big chunks of glass.
She's sifting through containers of glass shards.
Then you've got a medium glass, which is like this. It's not as big, but it's still got dimension to it. And then you've got a powder glass.
Kogar has lived in the North Country for over 40 years. For most of that time, she worked as a family therapist. As she neared retirement, she attended a workshop on making fused glass. Soon after, she sold her artwork for the first time at a show in Buffalo.
I guess I borrowed their tables at the time and had doilies tablecloths that I found at a rummage sale. And I had flimsy stands, but I sold a lot of things, probably because it was marked down. I didn't know how to price either.
She started Wellspring Spectrum Fused Glass, which Kogar calls her hobby/business. She crafts both functional and decorative pieces.
Some that are garden stands, some that are small pieces. And the small pieces would be things like night lights, soap dishes, butter dishes.
Kogar uses a kiln heated up to scorching temperatures to melt together intricately layered glass panes and shards. The end result is a sun-catching and vibrantly colorful piece of glass. Kogar's glasswork often features flowers or scenes of nature. Making a piece starts with choosing the glass. Kogar has large panes of all colors, wrapped in paper and filed like folders in a cupboard.
And if you look at this one's a kind of a yellow, but it's different than a yellow I have upstairs right now that I'm going to make sunflowers with. It's plain gray, but then you get into a piece like this, which is very pretty.
She also uses smaller chunks of broken glass called frit. She often makes them herself with a metal chopper.
So you take the glass and you're actually cutting it down on here, and then I can sift it in strainers.
After choosing ingredients, Kogar has to measure, score, and cut the glass with a diamond blade.
That piece is also going to take not just the cutting, it's going to take grinding those edges too a little bit, so I don't have all points that people are going to get jabbed on when it comes out of the kiln.
Kogar's grinder is a big hunk of metal perched on the side of her bathroom sink.
So I have to have water in it, and this is to keep this grinder wet. So I turn it on, and it grinds. And if I put a piece of glass, feel my fingertips.
After cutting, grinding, and arranging the glass, it's time for the kiln. When she fires a piece, Kogar says she has to get the temperature just right.
You whip it up fast, it'll maybe fuse the outside and crack the middle. Coming down too fast, it's going to either crack it or it'll turn gray. They call it devitrification.
Kogar started selling her work over a decade ago. She has her own way of keeping her artwork close to home.
It's been exciting to sell those big pieces, and I usually ask if a person would send me a photo of where they put it, because then I feel like something you made and put a lot of hours into is into someone's home, and they appreciate it.
Kogar says today her work is in homes from New York to California. Pretty good for a second career. For North Country Public Radio's North Country at Work project, I'm Anna Williams-Bergen in Saranac Lake.
You can see photos of Kogar's work on our website, ncpr.org. Funding for this program was provided in part by the New York State Department of Education.
You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. In just a minute, the first season of the Howl podcast has just wrapped up. And host of the show, Ethan Shanty, is back with us to take a look back. Then stick around after the program for Bird Note, the chorus of New Zealand bellbirds. That's just ahead at 8:42. But first, Todd has a look at the weather for us.
Oh, I know what you mean. Still hot and muggy today with highs upper 80s across much of the region. Increasing clouds, maybe a scattered shower or thunderstorm today, tonight, into tomorrow. Highs tomorrow on Friday, upper 70s, low 80s. And then clouds through the weekend, a chance of rain again on Sunday. Highs mid-70s Saturday and Sunday. We have cloudy skies and 74 degrees in Canton right now.
For years, people have been telling true 5-minute stories live on stages all over the North Country at the Howl Story Slam. They're super popular with packed crowds, and we've been recording those stories for our new podcast. The first season of the Howl podcast is just wrapped up, and host of the show, Ethan Shanty, maybe you've heard of him, is back with us on Northern Light to take a look back. Ethan, Hello.
Good morning, Monica and Todd.
Yeah, he's here too. So the season's all wrapped up as of yesterday.
Right.
Really, what's this last story about?
Yeah, so this last story is the last one for a couple of months. It's a story about a camping trip that's gone extremely wrong. It's perfectly timed too. I just got back from a backwoods camping adventure. Truck is still covered in mud. And on the last episode, Jim Howard tells the Howl audience about this yearly camping trip that he would take with his students. And one year, they're unexpectedly joined by a fellow teacher. He's never expressed any interest in being outdoors at all. And he's pretty much similarly unprepared for that experience.
And I'm guessing it doesn't turn out that well for them?
Right. Well, I mean, nobody really gets hurt, thankfully, but some feet get a little bit too close to the fire. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so let's listen to a clip of that, right?
Okay, yeah, sure. So this is Jim Howard. He's the final storyteller on this first season of the Howl podcast. We recorded this live on stage at the Howl Grand Slam in 2018. To set up the story just a little bit, Jim's friend Tom has just had a bad experience hiking a mountain. He actually asks if they can get a helicopter to bring him down the mountain. And so they decide that they're going to put him on craft duty the next day while Jim takes the kids out in a canoe.
Wednesday was CC Day. Canoes and crafts. And generally, all the kids would go out in the canoe, and the craft would be making sand candles. So I say, Tom, this is the only job you have. There's 75 boxes of wax. And near the stove over there, your job, melt the wax. By the time we come back in, everything will be fine. We'll have the kids make depressions in the sand. We'll put a little string in there. They'll make candles. Their mom and dad will be so happy. The parents and I take the 8 canoes and we head out onto Lake Colby. Everything is going quite smoothly until one of the kids goes, Mr. Howard, look at Mr. T. We move our canoe around. We look over there, and there's Tom on the edge of Lake Colby jumping up and down, jumping jacks. One arm, 2 arms, obviously, but 2 arms, he's just jumping crazy. And Tom never does jumping jacks, so this was kind of an unusual thing to see. So, and then one of the kids says he's yelling something. So I go, shh, quiet. We listen. The word fire comes rolling across Lake Colby into our canoe area. Oh my God! There goes my retirement.
That was Jim Howard. He's the closer of this season of the Howl podcast. That story told live on stage at the Howl Grand Slam in 2018. You can hear the full episode, the full season actually, at ncpr.org/howl.
And what has the response to the podcast been like?
Yeah, it's been really, really tremendous. A lot of people have reached out. Our audience is about 6,000 people. We've seen the show downloaded about 26,000 times. When you launch any brand new thing, you never know what to expect, but anytime 6,000 people pay attention to something you're doing, it feels pretty cool. Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. Yes. Well, and this is your first time hosting a show for NCPR, and you had to pick through a lot of stories to make up this first season. What was it about these stories that drew you to them?
Yeah, I really tried to find stories that first and foremost resonated with me because I was hosting the show. And from there, I had to wonder, are these stories universal? Like that story that Jim told. I think we've all got a friend who we've brought along with us on an adventure, and they find themselves a little bit out of their element. There's a story earlier this season from Kelsey Francis who used poison ivy to get out of gym class. And I think we've all kind of gone to ridiculous lengths to get ourselves out of something that we didn't do. And generally all of these stories have a kind of a particular North Country flavor to them. So I think when you listen to this season, you get a clear picture of the values and the ideals of the people in our area through these really intimate and funny stories that they're sharing, who they are, what they like, what they think about. And as I've been looking back, I think of it as kind of like an oral history of the North Country in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Was there a story that sort of really sticks with you that stood out to you?
Yeah, definitely. The story that Aaron Todd, who's a regular at the Howl Story Slam, he talks about butting heads with his 10th grade teacher. The episode's called The Ballad of Mad Dog Martin. Yeah. She really wanted him to live up to his fullest potential. I didn't have to really work that hard to find the connective tissue for me. I also had an English teacher who eventually became my mentor. Maurice Kenny was at SUNY Potsdam. I wanted to write fiction. fiction, eventually, write a novel. That didn't end up happening because he was a poet by trade. He insisted I take his poetry workshop. I said I was not interested. He told me, well, too bad. You are taking it. And I really resisted that at first because I didn't think I'd be very good at it. But now it's primarily what I write and what I feel very passionate about. So yeah.
And and you tell that story on the podcast yourself, and with each episode, you're introducing each of these storytellers with your own anecdote. Was that difficult to do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, some of these stories I'd never really told to anyone, so it felt a little bit weird to air them for the first time in such a public way, but now really felt like the right time to do that. So, all the storytellers this season obviously had the bravery to get up on stage and tell a bunch of strangers these stories that are sometimes embarrassing or silly. So I figured that if I'm the one hosting it, I've got to be as honest and truthful as they are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Ethaniel Shanty, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about the Howl podcast. The entire new season is available wherever you get your podcasts at ncpr.org/howl. Ethan, can we expect a new season soon?
Yeah, we're going to hopefully have season 2 ready to go for you in January.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Yes, we're looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Todd.
Music there by the Hot Club of Saratoga. And it's 27 minutes past 8. You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. Just a reminder that we're media sponsor for an event this weekend. It's Local Foods Weekend in St. Lawrence County. Starts tomorrow, continues through Sunday. You can explore a number of local venues, all dealing with food, farming, children, education. There are guided farm tours, hands-on workshops, activities for youngsters, farm-to-table meals. It's a celebration of the rural food system in St. Lawrence County, and it's presented by Cornell Cooperative Extension of St. Lawrence County. We'll have more on that coming up tomorrow during Northern Light. In the meantime, you can visit our website, ncpr.org/calendar. That's Local Foods Weekend, presented by St. Lawrence County's Cornell Cooperative Extension. It starts tomorrow and continues through the weekend.
And with Ethan coming on the show, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the upcoming Howl Story Slam. It's in Potsdam. This open microphone storytelling competition is open to anyone with a true 5-minute story to share on the night's theme, which is Falling for It. Spectators are welcome too. The Howl Story Slam is presented by the Adirondack Center for Writing and by NCPR. It'll be at the farmhouse at 1844 House. That's on Route 11, just outside of, in between Canton and Potsdam. That's coming up next Thursday evening, September 14th, between 7 and 8:15.
It's a big weekend in Newcomb as well, a 3-day celebration of Teddy Roosevelt's historic journey from the high peaks to the White House. Event for the entire family. Teddy Roosevelt Weekend in Newcomb, September 8th through the 10th. Live music, games, family events, crafting. Also a visit by a Roosevelt impersonator. That's throughout the town of Newcomb this weekend as well. Teddy Roosevelt Weekend. Check out more information about that event on our website, ncpr.org/calendar. That's the show.
That is the show for the day. Morning Edition continues in just a couple of minutes. Then join us after that for the Marketplace Morning Report coming up between 8:51 and 9 o'clock. Then later this morning, an important conversation about the Dobbs decision. It's been 15 months since that happened, and some groups are now pushing to prevent people from leaving their states for abortion care. We get into states' rights and health care coming up on 1A. That's between 10 and noon right here on NCPR. I'm Monica Sandreski.
I'm Todd Moe. Thanks for listening. Be well.